That evening, the house was quiet. The children were playing softly in the living room, and the maid was finishing up in the kitchen. Their parents had stepped out just an hour before. It was just her and the two little ones. Then came a knock at the door. It was soft, but sharp enough to freeze her in place. Who could that be at such an odd hour? Her boss never knocked. He had keys. So did his wife. Her heart skipped. She tiptoed to the door, peered through the peephole, nothing. Still, she opened it. Just a crack. That was the moment everything changed. Before she could react, Hans shoved the door wide open. A cloth was pressed to her face. The children screamed. That was how they were taken, to a place no one knew existed, before everything fell apart. The house of Mr. and Mrs. Akpan was filled with laughter, love, and peace. It was a modest home, not too grand, but every corner breathed warmth. The walls echoed with giggles from two playful children, and in the middle of it all was Amara the maid. But in truth, she was more than that. To the Akpans, she was family. Whenever Mr. Akpan bought clothes or toys for the kids, he always bought for Amara too. During festive seasons, her name was on the family list right beside his wife and children. She had come to the Akpans when she was just 16, now in her early 20s. She had become the pillar holding the daily routine together. Each morning, Amara would dress the children, prepare their breakfast, and walk them to the nearby school by foot. They always held her hands tightly, their laughter trailing behind like music on the wind. Mr. and Mrs. Akpan, both hard-working professionals, often returned home late. They trusted Amara completely. After all, she wasn't just the maid, she was the girl who had helped raise their children. The kids loved her dearly. She was their protector, their playmate, their second mother. But no one knew that the same love and trust they built into that home would soon be tested in the most terrifying way. It was a Wednesday morning. The sun had barely risen, and the streets were just beginning to stir. Amara held the children's hands as they made their way to school, chatting cheerfully about cartoons and breakfast. But then, something caught her eye. A white van, parked across the road, engine running. Inside, she saw two strange men, one in dark shades, the other chewing gum and staring in their direction, unblinking. She paused, tightened her grip on the children. One of the men stepped out casually and began walking in the same direction they were heading. He didn't say anything, didn't look directly at them, but Amara could feel it in her bones. They were being watched. Still, she shook it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence. She wasn't one to panic easily. That night, she mentioned it to no one. Not to Mr. Akpan, not to his wife, not even the children. But what Amara didn't know was that this wasn't the first time that van had been there, and it wouldn't be the last. For weeks they had been watched. Every routine, every movement studied. The kidnappers weren't strangers to the house anymore. They knew when the parents left for work. They knew Amara was always alone with the kids in the evenings. They knew where the spare key was kept. They even knew how tightly she locked the back door. So that evening, when the knock came, they weren't just random criminals. They were men who had planned this. And now, they were ready to strike. Mr. Akpan and his wife returned home that evening just past 7:30 p.m. as usual. They expected to hear the children running to the door, screaming "Daddy" and "Mummy," with Amara smiling faintly from behind. But this time, the house was silent. Too silent. Mr. Akpan reached for the front door. It opened easily. "That's strange," he muttered. "She always locks the door." They stepped in. The lights were on. Dinner sat cold on the dining table. The children's school bags were lying near the couch untouched. But there was no sign of Amara, and no sign of the kids. They called out once, twice, then louder. Still nothing. Mrs. Akpan rushed to the kitchen. The stove was off. The back door was locked. But the air felt wrong. Then came the rising fear. Mr. Akpan quickly accessed the CCTV app on his phone. He tapped it, nothing loaded. He tried again, error. He went to the control box by the hallway. That's when he saw it. The CCTV system had been disconnected 3 days ago. 3 days? He gasped. But we just noticed now. That's when the panic truly began. Mrs. Akpan dropped to her knees, her voice trembling. "Where are my children?" Amara's eyes fluttered open. The smell of damp soil hit her first, then the rustling of leaves above. She was lying on the ground. Her head pounded, her arms were sore. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her mind was foggy, trying to piece together what had happened. And then, it hit her. The knock, the door, the cloth pressed over her nose, the children screaming. She sat up sharply, panic racing through her chest. The kids. She looked around. They were there, curled beside her, sleeping or unconscious. Thank God. They were in a thick forest, surrounded by nothing but trees, darkness, and the faint sound of crickets. No roads, no voices, no buildings, just isolation. The children began to stir. The older one, Timmy, about 7 years old, opened his eyes and immediately clung to Amara. "Auntie, where are we?" She had no answer. The last thing she remembered was opening the door. Everything after that was a blur. But now, they were here miles away from home, stripped of safety, surrounded by danger. Somewhere in the shadows, the kidnappers were watching. And although Amara didn't know what they wanted yet, she knew one thing for sure. She had to protect these children with her life. Back in the city, the Akpans were drowning in worry. The police had been informed. Officers came to the house, took statements, and began their investigation. But their words sounded empty too. "Mr. Akpan, we'll do our best. Give us time." But time was the one thing he didn't have. That evening, just as the sun disappeared behind the city skyline, Mr. Akpan's phone rang. A known number. He hesitated, then answered, "Hello." At first, there was silence. Then, a voice, low, cold, calculated. "Mr. Akpan, we have your children and your maid." His heart dropped. For now, before he could respond, he heard it. "They're alive." Timmy's voice crying, "Daddy, Daddy, help us." Then the little one sobbing, "Please, don't hurt them, please." Mr. Akpan cried out, "You'll get them back, but it'll cost you 20 million naira." Silence. "W what? I don't have that kind of money. Please. You have 5 days. Wait, please. Can we talk?" Click. The line went dead. Mr. Akpan stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. His wife stared at him, trembling. What did they say? He didn't have the heart to answer, but deep down, he knew the countdown had already begun. Amara didn't sleep that night. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind in the trees made her flinch. The children had eventually cried themselves to sleep, their tiny bodies curled beside hers for warmth. But Amara, she lay awake, eyes wide, thoughts racing. How did we end up here? How do I get them out? What if no one finds us? She scanned the area. There were 3 kidnappers, maybe more. 2 men, rough and heavily built, and 1 woman, the silent type, but her eyes watched everything. They had tied their legs lightly with rope, enough to prevent escape but not to hurt. The forest was far too thick to run blindly anyway. Amara knew one wrong step could mean walking into deeper danger or worse, but she had to try something. The next morning, the sun crept through the trees in pale, cold rays. The children stirred. One of the kidnappers dropped a small loaf of dry bread near them, along with a bottle of water. Amara didn't want to eat, but for the kids' sake, she encouraged them to chew slowly. She kept her eyes low, trying not to provoke the guards, but every minute, she was studying them. Who seemed more relaxed? Who left their post? Where was the bag they brought in? Was there a knife? A phone? Anything? After the meal, Amara stood up slowly. "Please, I need to ease myself." One of the kidnappers grunted. Then, the female kidnapper stepped forward. "Let's go. Move." She led Amara a few meters into the trees, but never took her eyes off her. She had a knife strapped to her side and a small pistol tucked into her waistband. Amara glanced at it just for a second, but the woman noticed. "Don't even think about it," she snapped. Amara looked down, silently obeying. She knew there was nothing she could do yet. Trying to run would only make things worse. And if she was caught, the kids would be left all alone. Not now, she told herself. Be patient. Watch, wait. Because deep down, she knew there would be a moment. And when that moment came, she had to be ready. 2 days had passed. The forest had become both a prison and a puzzle for Amara. She counted every tree, every sound, Every step the kidnappers made, she noticed patterns. One of the men, the younger one, slim with a scar under his eye, was reckless. He often argued with the others and took more breaks than anyone else. Sometimes he wandered off to smoke or pee without saying a word. Then there was the female kidnapper, silent but smart. She never let her guard down, always watching, always the last to sleep. Amara began observing their shifts. In the afternoon, right after their meal, two of them would lie down to rest while one kept watch. Sometimes they switched off carelessly, especially when the leader was asleep. That's when she noticed it. During the second afternoon, the young scar-faced man left his post for a full 10 minutes, just to smoke. No one questioned him. No one noticed that the kids and Amara were left completely alone. Amara didn't move, then she couldn't risk it. But her eyes followed where he went. And when he walked away, he always went behind a large fallen tree, one covered in moss. Could there be a path there? Was that the edge of the camp? She didn't know yet, but now she had a target, a possible direction. That night, while the kids were asleep and the fire burned low, Amara lay still, pretending to sleep. But her mind was working faster than ever. That careless one might slip up again. And when he does, I'll be ready. By the third day, Mr. Akpan could barely recognize himself in the mirror. He hadn't slept. His eyes were sunken. His suit now hung loose on him like a burden. The ransom clock was ticking, and with just 2 days left, there was still no sign of the kids or Amara. But the police had finally launched a full-scale search, working on the assumption that the kidnappers had fled into the outskirts. Officers spread out across the surrounding bush paths, abandoned compounds, and forest trails near the city. They brought tracking dogs, interviewed local villagers, and even used drone footage, anything to find even a single clue. Then came a small breakthrough. A farmer reported seeing a suspicious white van parked near an uncompleted road a few days ago, deep near a forest boundary that led nowhere. When police arrived at the site, the van was gone, but they found something. A tiny purple hair clip. It was lying half buried in the soil. Mr. Akpan confirmed it immediately. It belonged to his daughter. That clip was the first real sign that they were alive. Now, the police had a direction. The search team entered the forest, cutting through the thick bushes with machetes, their boots sinking into soft soil. They moved cautiously, weapons drawn, radios crackling. But the forest was deep, and the kidnappers knew it better. Every second mattered. Back in the heart of the forest, Amara had no idea help was getting closer. But she could feel something shifting. And whether rescue came or not, she was preparing to make her move. It was late afternoon. Amara sat with her back against a tree, pretending to be tired, but her eyes were on the scar-faced kidnapper. Like clockwork, he stood, stretched, and wandered off toward the same mossy fallen tree. She waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then she leaned toward the older boy, Timmy, and whispered, "Next time he leaves, we may try something, but we must be quiet and fast." Timmy nodded, his little sister still asleep in his arms. Amara's heart beat faster. She was about to check the path herself when, crack! The sound of a stick snapping shattered the stillness. The little girl had woken up and stumbled forward, tripping over a root. Amara rushed to grab her, but it was too late. "Hey!" one of the men shouted. He stormed over, grabbing the girl by the arm roughly. "What are you doing? Sit down!" the girl cried out. Timmy jumped to his feet. Amara stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "She's just a child. Let her go." The man glared at her, his nostrils flaring. Then slowly he released the girl. Amara wrapped her arms around both children, pulling them close. Inside, she was shaking. They had come too close, too soon. But something had changed. The scar-faced one, watching from a distance, looked nervous. The group was tense, paranoid, and Amara could feel it. They were starting to crack. If they could create the right distraction, if she could just get to that path behind the mossy tree, there might still be hope. That night, the forest was colder than usual. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Amara waited for the fire to burn low, waited for the snoring to begin, waited for the stars to shift above them. She had studied the guard's pattern for days, and tonight, the scar-faced one had taken the last watch, which meant he'd eventually wander off like he always did. And he did, right on cue. He walked toward the mossy fallen tree, lighting a cigarette between his lips, completely unaware that Amara's eyes were locked on him. She turned to Timmy. "Wake your sister." Slowly. No sound. The boy obeyed instantly. His little sister stirred but didn't cry. Amara untied the loose knot around their ankles, carefully, silently. The kids were barefoot. So was she. She whispered, "We're going to crawl. Don't run. Don't talk. Just follow me." They moved. The ground was wet, cold. Every leaf crunched like thunder in her ears. But no one noticed. The fire crackled softly. The others were asleep. She reached a tree. The moss was soft, and behind it a narrow path. She turned back. They were still with her. They were doing it for the first time in days. She believed they might actually escape. They moved deeper, the trees swallowing them quickly. No moonlight, no noise, just hope. Then suddenly, a shout behind them. "They're gone. Wake up. They're gone." The forest exploded with chaos. Flashlights flared on. Footsteps thundered. Amara grabbed the kids and ran. Branches scratched her arms. Roots tried to pull her down, but she kept going. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew they couldn't stop now. The sound of angry voices grew louder behind them. But in the distance, was that a light? The forest was no longer still. The silence of the forest had been broken. Between the frightened footsteps of Amara and the children, and the heavy boots of the police, combing through the undergrowth. But the kidnappers felt it too. They had been chasing blindly, flashlights slicing through the trees, rage pulsing in their lungs until suddenly they stopped. The leader raised his hand. He crouched and touched the forest floor. He sniffed the air, listened. Then he whispered, "We're not alone anymore." The others looked around, alert now. Then came the faintest sound, not from Amara, not from the children, but from the opposite direction. Boots crunching, dogs barking, voices. The police were getting closer. "Let's go back and get the rest of our things." Panic flashed across the scar-faced man's eyes. "We can't stay here." "No." The leader snapped. "They've already found this area." The female kidnapper stepped forward. "We need to move them now. Deeper. We'll lose the maid and the kids for now, but if we go now, we can wait it out." They agreed, and just like that they changed course. Amara, struggling through the bushes with the children, thought she had outrun them, but she hadn't realized the kidnappers were no longer chasing. They were retreating, carrying their gear, weapons, and rage deeper into the jungle, determined not to be caught. And by the time the police reached the area, all they found were footprints in the dirt, some rope, and the dying embers of a campfire. The officer turned to Inspector Dyke, breathless. "They were just here." He looked around, eyes narrowing. "But they're not far. They've changed position." They had been moving for what felt like hours. Amara's feet were blistered. Her arms ached from carrying the younger child. Timmy was doing his best to keep up, but his little legs were weakening. Still, they pressed on. The barking of the dogs and shouts of the police had faded into the distance. Amara didn't know if she was headed towards safety or deeper into danger. All she knew was that they were no longer being chased. Or so she thought. She paused near a thick group of shrubs to rest, carefully lowering the little girl to the ground. The forest was quieter now. Too quiet. That's when she heard it. A snap, a breath, a whisper. She turned, but it was too late. A strong arm yanked her backward, and a hand covered her mouth. Timmy screamed. The two children tried to run, but the female kidnapper stepped out from behind a tree, grabbing both of them in one move. Amara struggled, kicked, bit, but the man dragged her down to the ground. "You really thought you could escape?" He hissed in her ear. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from pure rage. "Let them go. Please let them go." But the leader stepped out next, calm and angry all at once. "No more chances. You've made things worse for yourself." This time, they didn't tie them loosely. They bound her hands behind her back, tied the children tighter, and began dragging them in the opposite direction of the police. They were moving to a new hideout, one deeper, one darker. Amara had failed, or so she thought. But what she didn't know was that one of the officers had found the exact spot she rested moments earlier. And now, the police were closing in faster than the kidnappers expected. The clock was ticking and time was almost up. Mr. Akpan sat in his car just outside the police station, staring blankly at his phone. His wife sat beside him, holding back tears. She hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. They had thought the police were close. They had even begun to believe that a rescue might happen before the ransom deadline. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. Again. Mr. Akpan picked up immediately. Hello? Hello? The voice on the other end was colder this time. You thought you were smart, didn't you? Sending police into the forest, tracking us. Now the price has changed. Mr. Akpan's heart sank. Please don't do this. I didn't mean to. Silence. Since you want to play games with the lives of your children, the ransom is now 40 million naira. You have 3 days left. No more. No less. And if we see a single uniform again, you won't get them back. Dead or alive. Click. The line went dead again. Mr. Akpan dropped the phone. His wife gasped, covering her mouth. 40 million? They know, he whispered. They know the police are close. And now they're angrier than ever. The forest grew thicker as they moved. The trees towered higher. The light faded faster, and the air became damp, almost suffocating. Amara's feet dragged along the rough path, her hands tied tightly behind her back. The children were quiet now, not because they weren't scared, but because they were too tired to cry anymore. They had been walking for hours, and finally, they stopped. It wasn't a proper camp this time. The new hideout was an abandoned hunter's shack, buried deep in the woods. It was built from old wood and rusted metal sheets. Half of the roof was missing, and the floor was covered in dried leaves and rat droppings. There were no windows, just one small door. One way in, one way out. The kidnappers shoved Amara and the kids inside and slammed the door. Darkness swallowed them. It smelled like rot, and something worse, like death. Amara crawled over to the children and hugged them close. They were shivering. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried. I really tried. But even as she said it, something inside her refused to give up. She had seen the kidnappers arguing on the way here. The leader was angry, blaming the others for letting them escape. The scar-faced one looked nervous now, jumpy, unsure. The female kidnapper, quiet, but twitchy, like she was losing patience. The group was no longer in control. They were panicking, splitting, and that might still be her chance. But until then, Amara pulled the children into her arms and whispered, just hold on. Don't give up. Help is coming. It has to be. Outside, one of the kidnappers stood guard with a gun, but not far behind him was a movement in the trees, a flash of a uniform. The police were closing in. Amara's wrists were sore and bleeding, but she didn't care. Timi's hands were free too, and she quickly untied the little girl. The children looked up at her, tired, scared, but trusting. She pressed a finger to her lips. Quiet now. We're leaving. Outside, the kidnappers were still arguing. They hadn't heard the rope snap. Amara stood, scanning the small, broken wooden wall. Then she spotted a loose panel near the back corner. She crept to it, pulled gently, and it shifted open, just enough for a person to squeeze through. She went first, then helped Timi, then the little girl. Within seconds, they were outside, back in the forest. But this time, Amara wasn't running blindly. She crouched low, scanning the trees. And then she saw it. A torchlight flashing quickly in a pattern. Twice, then once. A signal. The police were out there, watching, waiting. But the kidnappers were still between them. So Amara did the only thing she could. She led the children in a wide curve, around the camp, stepping over roots, ducking behind logs, covering the children's mouths whenever they nearly cried out. One wrong sound could mean death. Still, she pushed forward. Then they heard it. A shout. They're gone. The shack is empty. Gunshots rang out behind them. But by then, Amara had spotted them, 3 officers in uniform, rushing through the trees toward them. Help! Over here! She cried, waving one arm desperately. The police raised their rifles and surrounded her. Down! We've got them. The children are safe. Timi burst into tears. His little sister clung to Amara's dress. And Amara, the maid they had underestimated, dropped to her knees and wept. Not from fear, but from relief. They were safe. She had done it. Cut to Mr. Akpan and his wife arriving at the police post, running to embrace their children. Mr. Akpan turns to Amara, speechless, then pulls her into a tearful hug. She was just their maid, but that night, she became their savior.